Welcome back to my how to draw hairstyles tutorial. This second video covers how to draw more complex hairstyles like braids, twists, locks, finger waves, and several variations of short or men's hairstyles. Feel free to skip to whatever style you want to know about. The first part of this tutorial is linked in the description, but you can watch it in whatever order you want. First, I'll be showing how to draw braids. You may also know them as plaits depending on where you're from. A braid is made when sections of hair are wrapped around other sections in a specific order. It's typically done in 3 sections, but can also be done in a 2-section twist, or in lots of small sections like a fishtail braid. I have a quick, simple braid that I like to draw. Basically, I will just outline it with drawing these little lumpy lines on either side. They show how thick the hair is. Thick hair will have larger lumps and fine hair will be smaller. When you braid layered hair, the braid will start larger and become smaller as you get to the ends. Once I've drawn both sides, I'll do a series of curved diagonal lines going upwards from the center to give the illusion of overlapping pieces of hair, very similar to how I drew the side part in the beginning of the first video. If you found this video before watching the other video, then you should just know that I will be drawing a front view, 3/4 view, and side profile view for every hairstyle that I show. This is because someone requested it on a past tutorial, so I hope it helps. So again, what I'm doing to form the braid is drawing a chain of loose C-shapes to form the sides. Then from there, when the hair is tied off, I come up with curved lines that sprout out of each other about halfway up from the previous line. And then if I feel like it, I'll go in and connect them to the sides, or I'll add in a lot of small directional lines to show the strands of hair. The level of detail that you add to the hair should always match the level of detail in the rest of the drawing. For the hair on the end that is not braided, I'm doing kind of an inverted teardrop shape. This is a little bit more cartoony than I would normally do, but this is, as I said, the basic version of the way I draw braids. Next, I'll be drawing double braids or pigtail braids, basically the same but one on each side. So I'm doing a very simple center parted bangs or fringe, and then I'm showing my part up top where the hair splits in half. And then for this one I'm going to show a more fine hair, so the braid is much smaller, the lumps are smaller and closer together, and overall the width of it is much thinner. Other than that, it's exactly the same steps. You do your curved lines down either side, and then you do your lines coming up the center. I'm also doing a less cartoony version of the hair on the ends for this one. I've made it a little bit longer and with a slight wave to it. If you're new to drawing braids, one thing that I would recommend that I'm unfortunately not showing here is that you could actually sketch a line where you want your braid to go. So for instance, if the braid is draped over clothing or the shoulders, you might draw a very light curved line that shows the direction that you need to draw your outside lines in. So that way you don't draw your lines and then realize they're going in the wrong direction. From the front views, it won't be as obvious that the hair is draping over the shoulders, but from this side angle, you'll be able to see that the hair actually is curving forward as it drapes over the shoulder to the front. So that would definitely be a good time to draw yourself a little guideline. That way your braid is draping naturally and going in the direction that you want it to go. When the side of the head is visible, you'll also want to definitely draw a few little directional lines showing that the hair is all being pulled into the braid. Next, I'm going to show French and Dutch braids, and I'm going to start with a 3/4 angle on this one because it wouldn't be very easy to see from the front, so we're just going to skip that to keep the video hopefully not as long as the first one. French and Dutch braids are when you start with a small braid and add more hair to each section as you go. I'm going to start with the French braid, and what differentiates the French braid from the Dutch braid is that the French braid appears to be on the underside of the hair while the Dutch braid appears to sit on top of the hair. The style that you end up with depends on whether or not you're braiding the hair over itself or under itself. To mimic this in a drawing, I start with the same outline of the braid, but then for my center line, which shows the hair overlapping, I start at the top for the part that's on the scalp so that I can increase the size of my lines accordingly as I move down. And then for the part of the braid that isn't on the head, you'll see that I do it in the same way and meet in the middle. Then for my directional lines on the scalp, I will draw them coming all the way from the hairline and the part and meeting in that center line. Here it is one more time because that did turn out just a little bit cluttered looking, so here you can see a little bit better the way that I'm adding in the directional lines and then how I'm connecting it to the loose part of the braid. You can get as detailed and precise with it as you would like. For the sake of the tutorial, I am keeping things on the loose side and a little bit sketchy, so obviously add as much detail as you like. This next one will be the Dutch style braid, which, as I said, appears to sit on top of the hair rather than underneath it. So to do that, I'm actually going to draw a similar thing to how I did the loose braid. I'm going to do an outline of a braid right on top of the scalp and have it keep going right into the rest of the braid. For the directional lines going into the braid, I'm drawing them from the hairline right to the edge of my braid instead of going to that center line. And this is because to get this style of braid, you would put the hair strand underneath the other strand, so it's showing the hair going under the braid. Once again, I'll show you a simplified version of this from the back. I'm doing my braid outline right on top of the scalp, having it start small and get larger as it gathers more hair. And then at the neckline, where there isn't more hair being added, I'm tapering it back down again as it goes to the ends. Then adding my overlapping center lines all the way up to the top. And you'll notice how the lines showing the hair being pulled into the braid are slightly curved. This is because the head is a round three-dimensional shape, so if I were to draw straight lines, it would look very flat and unnatural. This one will be a side profile of the French braid, and this one is one that is on the side of the head, much like the first one that I did. Next, I will also draw the side profile of a French braid on the back of the head. So from the top down, I'm adding my overlapping lines, and then I'm filling out the shape of my braid, and then bringing those overlapping lines up to meet the lines I already drew. You don't have to do it this way, this is just my method. I'm sure there's lots of other ways that you could draw this. This is just a way that I found to be very quick and easy for me. Just making a little bit more room. I probably should have gone to another page, but I was trying to use as little paper as possible. Obviously from this angle we're only going to see half of the braid, So I'm going to start with that side of the braid, those lumpy lines, and then draw the hair going into it. And using this last little bit of space, here is the Dutch braid from the side on the back of the head. On the very back of the head, we're doing the lumpy lines, just like we would on the edge of a normal braid, going all the way down. And then from the neckline, we're going to continue the lumps going down to form the braid. Then at this point, we're going to show where the pieces are overlapping over the other ones. So we'll draw the other side of the braid. This video is all about drawing, but I still want to show myself coloring these in. Basically, all I'm doing is painting in the direction that the hair is going and leaving little highlights as I go. It's definitely a lot easier to color in hair that is in a specific style than it is to paint hair that's hanging down loosely, because hair that's in a style like these braids has already got a shape for you to follow, whereas when it's all down and loose, you have to give it definition and texture in other ways. And I show how to do that in my How to Paint Hair video. Continuing on with more styles of braids. These are box braids, and there are a few other names for them too, depending on how and where they are done. To draw this style, I'm using the exact same method that I used for drawing larger braids, except I've scaled everything down to match the size of the braids that I want to draw. In order to draw this style well, it helps to understand the anatomy of what's going on, and that is that the hair on the scalp has been parted into many small squares or other shapes, and each section is braided individually. Additional hair extensions can be added to make the braid thicker and longer, and to play with the hair color as well. The thickness and amount of braids that you're doing will decide if you need to draw the parts or sections showing on the scalp or not. For this one, I'm not, because it's a lot of braids in small, close together sections, which hide most of the scalp. Larger braids would often have larger sections, so they would have more space between them, which means that there would be more of a chance of having a visible scalp. I'll demonstrate the way that looks next. Another thing to keep in mind is that there are layers of braids underneath the ones that are showing, so you need to show a certain amount of volume. The thicker the braids, the higher up the hair will sit. Here's an example of the same style, but with larger braids. The best thing you can do when you're learning to draw hairstyles is to actually look up photos of the hairstyles that you want to draw, because a drawing will only show you so much, but the photo will actually show you what's there and the way that the hair parts and various other things that a drawing might have left out. An important thing to mention about drawing these hairstyles, as well as the next several that I'm going to show, is that you should only draw them on people and characters where it's culturally appropriate to do so. Braided and protective styles like these have a lot of history and meaning behind them, so it's important that we are respectful and don't accidentally participate in cultural appropriation with our artwork. If you aren't sure what hairstyles would and wouldn't be appropriate to draw on the character that you're drawing, just do a bit of research first. Braided hair can also be styled into ponytails, buns, and half up, half down hairstyles like I showed in my previous video. The way to do that is that instead of showing hair strands going in those directions, you would instead draw the individual braids. Just remember that braids will maintain their density, so make sure your style has a lot of volume. For this one, I'm drawing the braids pulled back into a bun, so I'm drawing the outline of the braids going back. And then drawing my lines inside. going to draw the shape of my bun. The more time you put into drawing your hair, the better it will look. Unfortunately, I'm going very fast in order to fit a lot of hairstyles into one video. An alternative to the 3-strand braid is a twist. This is done by twisting 2 strands together. And the way I draw this is that I will draw the outline of the braid, but instead of doing a center line, I draw horizontal lines all the way across. It looks best if you line them up with your C-shapes on the outside edge of the twist. When you twist hair together like this in real life, it will actually hold itself in place if you do it correctly because the hair is twisting against itself. So there are a lot of ways that you can use this style. Here I'm drawing them in a similar way to how I did the box braids, but they can also be twisted up into buns called Bantu knots. And I did attempt to draw it, but unfortunately it turned out really bad, so that's something I'll be working on. Definitely look up pictures if you want to know more about it. I think I'm doing a slightly better job of showing the volume of the hair with this particular style. On the first two, they do seem a little flat if you're thinking about how there are rows of braids underneath all the other braids. So for this one, I would say it has a more accurate level of volume. Next, I'm going to draw cornrows. Cornrows are small, narrow sections of hair that are braided very close to the scalp. They're almost always done in a Dutch style so that the braid sits on the top. The typical cornrow will start at the front hairline and be braided to the back. However, there are variations. They can go in a specific shape. They don't have to be in a straight line. They can be in waves and other shapes. There's really a lot that can be done, and it's definitely an art form. This one is a front view with the braids going straight back, and as you can see, I'm doing that outline that sits on top of the hair, so that's that Dutch style braid. And then I'm doing very thin braids coming down and doing a very sloppy job of it, but since I already drew the small individual braids, just imagine that it's closer to that style. This one is going to be a version with larger braids or cornrows. So I'm starting out by drawing the sections between where each braid will be. So kind of like how I drew parts in the first video. And then between each of those, I'm drawing my braid outline. Typically the braid will start small and get larger as more hair is added in. The only time it wouldn't do that is if hair extensions are added in right at the beginning of the braid. I'm showing the hair going into the braid by starting out by drawing a few little X shapes and then starting my braid outline shape. After I've drawn the outline and the braid, I'm going back in and connecting my part to the braid by drawing little directional lines, showing the hair going towards the braid, but not overlapping over it. This is actually pretty difficult to do on such a small drawing like this and would definitely look a lot better on a much larger drawing where you can show a lot more detail and definition between each of the elements in this hairstyle. Next, I'll be showing locks, which you may also know as dreadlocks. As with braids, there are a lot of cultural and spiritual meanings behind this particular hairstyle, and those vary from person to person. Locks can form naturally on their own, or they can be cultivated to all be a uniform size and shape. For this tutorial, I'll be showing the more cultivated version. Similar to the braids, locks can also be done in many different sizes, ranging from very thin to very thick. The main difference is how you show the texture, and the way that I do that is to draw perpendicular lines throughout each lock to show the way that the hair has locked in on itself rather than showing it being in a braid. The style that I'm drawing right now is going to be a low ponytail. You'll see it in a bit, it probably looks a little bit strange right now. Just like I mentioned with the braids, locks can be styled into many other hairstyles. They can be pulled up into ponytails, they can be twisted into buns, the locks themselves can be braided. There's a lot of different things that you can do. The main thing is just to keep in mind the thickness of the locks, so they're going to have a lot of dimension to them, which means that the hairstyle will have a lot of volume, much like what I said with the braids. And here is that low ponytail portion. The texture of the locks will vary from person to person, but one thing I've noticed is that locks do tend to be a little bit denser, so they will kind of take on a form of their own and they won't necessarily drape across the shoulders or follow gravity the way that a braid might. For this next angle, I'm going to show locks pulled up into a high ponytail. So the locks, much like the braids, will all be pulled in one direction, up towards where you want your ponytail to start. The idea of this video is that I'm just giving you kind of the ingredients to create each of these hairstyles. Hopefully by seeing this same kind of thing over and over, you'll understand how to draw these yourself at whatever angle you want. So it's not necessarily so that you can copy exactly what I'm doing, although you could if you want, but that's why I'm showing this one as a high ponytail instead of a low ponytail, and why the side profile view will also be a slightly different hairstyle. That, and since these styles are a lot more complex, I wanted to keep the video short, so I'm trying to show variations within each angle, rather than drawing the same style over and over again from different angles. Here's another example of what I mean about locks not necessarily following gravity. If you look up photos, you'll see a lot of differences in the weight of the hair and what it does, usually depending on the thickness and length and things like that. For the side profile view, I'll be showing the locks in a half up, half down style. It's a very loose one where the hair is held in place by just a few locks which are tied together in the back. Next, I'm drawing finger waves, and I'm skipping straight to a 3/4 angle for this one because from the front it probably wouldn't show up as well. So I'm drawing my part, and then what a finger wave is the hair is styled into flat waves on the head by holding the fingers down over certain sections of hair while it is being combed into this curved shape. To draw that, I'll draw the way that I want the waves to go on the front of the hairline, and then fill in the hair with C-shapes alternating in different directions to show the hair going in different directions. Here's the same thing from a side profile. So I started with my front edge of the hair, and then I'm filling in the directional lines showing the curls alternating in different directions. The length of this hairstyle can vary, but typically what I see is that it's kept short and cropped close to the head, and any loose hair would be styled into a tight bun or sometimes left down in waves, which I'm going to add to the other head. I'm definitely not an expert on any of these hairstyles that I'm showing. The only reason that I know how to draw them is just from the experience of drawing them over and over again when I worked as a caricature artist for about 5 years. In a job like that, you have to quickly learn how to draw just about every type of hair, or at least how to make it look similar to how it looks in real life. And finally, here are the short hairstyles. I'm going to start with a buzz cut, or not quite a shaved head, but where the hair is very short. I'm starting at the hairline with very small dashed lines, and then for the outline of the head, I'm also doing very small dashed lines. And instead of doing directional lines showing the hair, what I just do is do a few small little dots within the area of hair to show that the length of hair is very short. I mentioned in the other video that I would show different hairlines when I got to this point. So here's an example of a slightly receding hairline, and you can see that it's receding because at the corner, the top corner of the forehead or the temple, the hairline goes slightly back. And here's an example of that again, but from the side profile. Here I'm showing an example of a hairline with a widow's peak, which is that pointed area in the center of the forehead. And then here's another example of a hairline that is receding backwards. which just means that the hair is thinning from the forehead back. Part of what's going to make it obvious that this is a very short haircut is going to be the way that I color it. To show short hair, what you want to do is do the hair just 1 or 2 shades darker than the skin color. And then the longer the hair gets, the darker and more solid it will appear. For me, it's faster to show this with watercolor, but obviously you can do it with pencil or pen using different shading or like dots or cross hatching, just different drawing techniques. What I'm showing with this coloring is a fairly common style of men's hair, which is where the hair tapers from long to short, longer at the top, and then moving shorter as it goes down to the hairline that is around the ear and at the neck. So to show that, I'm just doing a gradient where it appears darker on top and gets lighter as it goes down. One of the techniques that I use to do this is that I will apply a wash of color, and then I'll come back in with a dry brush, or I'll have dried my brush off and run it over the areas that I want to pick up some color from, and that will help to lighten the overall color. Another popular style for short hair is the fade, sometimes called a skin fade or a bald fade. The meaning can kind of vary depending on where you are, where you're from. The overall idea, though, is very similar to the tapered effect, where the hair is cut shorter as it goes down towards the neck, but it's a lot more extreme. Usually it's much shorter and usually more skin is showing through. So these dotted lines that I've drawn above the ear can represent either the height of the fade, where the gradient starts to change, and it can also represent the different types of fades, which are a high fade, a medium fade, and a low fade. Obviously the high one is the one that starts fading at the temple, the medium would be in between, and then the low fade is the one directly above the ear. The first head I've drawn is an example of a drop fade, which curves and drops down towards the back. And then the one next to it is just your classic straight across, very military style of fade. And here is how I would show that gradient with paint. So starting with the dark color on top, and then just blending down as I go into each section. If you're using watercolor, you'll definitely want to do this step after you've applied your skin color. That way it will blend in with the skin and look very natural. If you're using other mediums like maybe acrylic paint or even colored pencils, the order that you do it in doesn't matter quite as much, as long as you're able to show that kind of blended effect. On this second head, I'm going to do a wet on wet technique where I apply the water first and a light amount of the paint, and then slowly add in more pigment, allowing the pigment to fade naturally into the part of the head that's already wet. So this is another way that you can achieve that gradient effect. And you definitely don't have to sketch out those lines showing where the gradient will change. In fact, for a real drawing, I definitely would not do that, because you can clearly see it through the paint and it does look a bit strange. Something that is often paired with the fade is a lineup, which is where the hairline actually gets straightened out and cleaned up with either trimmers or a straight razor. So you can see that very boxy shape around the hairline. Typically, people will use straight, squared off, angular lines to show masculinity, while using softer, curvier lines to show femininity. So for example, I'm drawing the same haircut that I just did, but I'm making it slightly more feminine. By softening the edges, I have softened that area in front of the ear, the sideburn area, by making it a little bit more pointed and curved. And overall, the hair is just a little bit more rounded and loose. So that's something to keep in mind if you struggle with drawing people that look more masculine or more feminine. Next, I'm drawing what I consider to be a pretty standard short haircut. It's similar to the tapered one that I showed at the beginning, but the top is a little bit longer, and the hair is brushed kind of straight up or straight back. To show that the hair varies in length, what I'm doing is adding a few dots in the lower half of the hair while leaving the top pretty smooth, and I think that kind of imitates the look of longer hair going into shorter hair. Another pretty standard short hairstyle is a side part, which, just like the long hair version, is parted on the side. This style can be used with the taper or the fade. Really, you can mix and match a lot of the top and bottom styles for these short haircuts. This one I'm showing right now is a bit more of a taper. Over here, I'm going to show a longer version of each of the styles that I just drew. So this one will be a longer version of that straight up and back style. And I'm doing that by just making the top stick up just a little bit more, but then tapering it down in the same way. And here is a longer version of that side part. Again, same kind of thing, you just make the top a little bit longer. This one, because it's longer and straight hair, it's gonna fall down to follow gravity. And actually, if you saw the first video in this tutorial, this is pretty similar to how I drew bangs or fringe. So if you learned that part, then you basically know how to do this hairstyle. Next will be a slightly longer short hairstyle that is curly or wavy. So the hairline won't be showing, instead the hair will come straight down and form curls in front of the forehead. And then to do the rest of the hair, I'm just doing a lot of curvy, alternating C-shaped lines to show the curls. Here it is again from a 3/4 angle. Same thing, cover the face with a few curls. I guess not cover, but just frame the face. I don't really know how to logically explain the way that I draw curls because it does feel kind of intuitive. But I think it's because I've drawn a lot of them, so just having practiced it, I kind of just know which way is gonna look natural. But the best way I could describe it, I guess, is just alternating the the curved shapes. Here's a slightly shorter haircut, but with tighter curls. So I'm doing those curved shapes a little bit smaller, a little bit closer together, but also doing a smaller shape overall to show that the hair isn't quite as long. I'm also going to be showing this one that has a little bit of a disconnect, so it's longer on top and then abruptly gets shorter on the sides of the head. And here for some reason I decided to draw another buzz cut. I'm not sure why. I think I was getting tired by this point because I was drawing all of these things back to back. Maybe this is an example of it on curlier hair but very short. I think that's probably what I was going for. And this last style that I'm drawing is an example of tightly curled hair that is on the longer side. So for this one, the hairline is not showing because the hair is sticking out so much in the front that it appears to cover the hairline. And for the outside edge of the hair, I'm doing clusters of very small squiggly lines to indicate those very small and tight curls. The overall shape of the hair can vary depending on the texture, the way it's cut, and the way it's styled. I had actually planned to include facial hair like beards and mustaches in this tutorial as well, but when I drew it out, it actually turned out pretty terrible, which I'm sure is partly due to me drawing it so small, but also just me not being used to drawing that with pencil. I'm more used to watercolor. So maybe that will be something for a future tutorial, maybe not, we'll see. I've definitely learned that I need to do more specific tutorials instead of trying to cover every single thing all in one video. Despite my best efforts, I ended up breaking this tutorial into 2 videos, which is kind of a bummer. It probably should have been about 6 different videos, but by the time I realized that, it was too late. So hopefully you learned something, or at least enjoyed watching me draw. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope to see you back for the next one.